Hello, Alex. It is so good to have you today joining me on Health Talk with Farhan. And I met you recently, and I was inspired by your ambition, by your vision, and I wanted to talk to you in more detail. So, you are a physician and a CEO of Valhalla Healthcare. Please welcome and join me and tell me a little bit about yourself.
Absolutely. First of all, Dr. Tahir, thank you very much for asking me to be on your program. It's an honor and very kind words that you have. Valhalla Healthcare, we are a company, essentially a team of healthcare providers and data scientists that have teamed up together to solve some of the big problems in healthcare with the mission of trying to help to apply these technologies to help provide the affordable, accessible, and effective healthcare that every person deserves.
Okay, wonderful. That's a great ambition. And I understand that this is a path you took after you graduated from medical school. And now you are developing an artificial intelligence technology and using that to create this solution for, as I understand, and we shared this, a painful part that every physician in this country has to go through is the electronic medical records, and you're bringing a great solution to that. So, why did you choose this shift from being a clinician and getting into digital health?
Yeah, it's quite a long story, and hopefully we can get into some of the bits of it at least during this conversation. But you know, one thing is I've always wanted to be a physician. You can ask my parents. My mother will tell you ever since I was as young as 5 years old that I've always wanted to be a doctor. Always very interested in the human aspects, human anatomy, as well as the profession in itself. Um, but it wasn't until I got to around, let's say, medical school and honestly the clinical years where I learned that unfortunately we were painted this picture all the way in our younger years during this path and where we invested to become a physician. And by the time that we actually get exposed to the real day practice, if you were to break up the amount of time that the physician spends um, in their profession and you were to describe them, there's the way that a lot of physicians would describe it is honestly more of as a glorified scribe in some of these specialties, rather than being a healthcare provider, and that's because of that ever growing administrative burden.
So, as a medical student, how did you realize? How were you even thinking about putting yourself from a medical student position, and then how life of a physician is? How did you develop that connection of life after medical school?
Yeah, you know, one is of course going through the clinical rotations as part of our medical curriculum to go and rotate through all these, and experience firsthand, be part of the care team at, to a limited extent, but still part of it, from across different specialties. But I took it a step further, and this is something I think many medical students didn't really engage in because of making sure to try to get that good grade and get be in the good graces of attendings. But I would actually I would kind of almost pseudo interview all my attendings and residents and fellows and kind of really get their candid response as to, let's not talk about the clinical medicine aspects of it, but the practice of medicine and what you think. What are some of the biggest problems? And time after time, I would say over 80%, especially of the attendings, when it was a private discussion with them, they would admit that they believed there were a lot of shortcomings in the current practice of medicine due to many reasons of everything from the financial incentives to administrative burdens that were kind of getting in the way of the pure practice of medicine.
Alex, I have to say that as a physician, I can clearly remember 2012 was when I became an independent physician as a rheumatologist, and I started the integrative practice. I was at that time was facing the difficulty of electronic medical record and trying to decide. And I think that's the time when you started focusing on it, on this pain problem, because you are at that time you were you were starting your medical school. You had graduated with some technology background from Rice University, right? And then you also went on to develop something called edumr, or educational tool. So share that story with me about.
Sure. Valhalla Healthcare, as you mentioned, is not my first go at a startup. I had several projects and endeavors that I've done, mostly actually while I was still a medical student, if you can believe it or not. But EduMR, or spelled EDUMR, was a project that myself and several medical students, when I was a first year and then also a second year medical student, that we developed because we identified a problem in a curriculum which is pretty common across medical schools called problem-based learning,
Hmm.
where you get together in kind of a round table with fellow medical students led by a clinician or a professional who will actually go through a lot of these cases, patient cases, and will kind of take a holistic view at this of these cases, from everything from the medical aspects to the basic science aspects to the ethical considerations of a patient case encounter, and that was great. The problem that we identified was that, one, this was all being done just straight on paper and handouts, right? Which
Yeah.
meant not only were we also using tons and tons of paper, which is a cost in itself, but most importantly, these were static timelines. And even if us as medical students and said, hey, what would we want to do? What would we want to order for this patient that comes in with this presentation? Just a very generalized presentation. What would I do if I was a doctor, and why, right? We didn't really get that choice because it was a static paper timeline. The concept was, when we created, say, well, hey, what if we created a mock EMR, a shell of an EHR, that allowed us to engage with these patient encounters and allow us as budding physicians to make these decisions to, hey, I want to order a CBC, I want to order a CMP, or I want to put a patient on a trial of corticosteroids if they're coming in with some sort of potentially asthmatic chief complaint. um, and be able to make that decision, which allows us to, one, make the mistake if we are wrong, and then two, learn from it and correct from it, instead of being told, hey, this is what you're supposed to do. It's so that trial of learning, and that's what we wanted to package into, for the problem-based learning curriculum, into essentially a dynamic approach.
It sounds like a game that all medical students should play. Like a video game is like, where we are given a case and we order a test that was unnecessary, and it could tell you your patient is getting better or worse,
Yeah,
right?
or it just tells you nothing, right?
Yeah,
It comes
yeah.
back with the normal CBC. What do you want to do now?
What do you want to
Um,
do now?
exactly, and I would say more of a simulation
Yeah,
is probably a
simulation.
better way to describe it.
Yeah.
And then actually there were some other aspects we were studying to potentially even tie in costs. So bringing in the concept of costs in healthcare, right? You're racking up these charges for your patients, or the health insurance or the hospital system, to give you the physician finally some exposure to some of the costs behind practicing a type of medicine that is not 100% efficient. Now, our goal is to be primarily healthcare providers, physicians, but the goal was to potentially also expose just to the idea of costs.
Wow, that's impressive. Um, you have developed softwares right from your medical school, and then you've been now building up onto that technology. Your background is primarily medicine. How is that technology part, the software part, is coming into the picture?
Yeah, I do still consider myself, a physician. I may not be a clinician since I don't practice, but my training, and actually I've had a pretty limited technological background myself. But I think the key strengths that I've brought in is more of problem solving and identification of solutions, and really understanding the problems and developing solutions that focus on the problem rather than the technology itself. So technology is just a means to an end,
Means to an
for
end, yeah.
fixing the solution. And I think, maybe we can get into that in a little bit later in the conversation, but I think the problem with a lot of technology companies in healthcare in particular is that too many of these companies or solutions focus and obsess over the technology itself rather than the problem and the application of the technology to solving the problem. And usually that's because that there's a lack of understanding of the physician workflow or the practice of medicine. Um,
So
and yeah,
I can see that you are unique in that way. That right from the young age, you have actually been able to see the problems faced by healthcare providers. You see what patients find difficult, because most of the time, my patients, I'm actually, my back is towards them because I'm looking at the computer, right? And we are uh, getting that information because they give me a piece of paper and I have this chart and I'm reviewing it. Rather than engaging with the patient, I'm looking around it. So you have noticed that that's a bigger problem. Satisfaction has gone down, and doctors are not doing what they're good at, is listening to patient, providing compassion and solutions and education, but working on the computer. So you have found a unique way of finding problems and trying to bring technology to help. What is your dream product or dream company? What are you now trying to do with Valhalla Health?
yeah, no, that's a great question, and perhaps I can introduce a little bit about our technology at Valhalla Healthcare. So, the main solution that you described and the problem that we're solving is that amount of time that doctors have to spend, and not just doctors, actually, healthcare providers, including nurses, have to
Yeah.
spend on the computer, on the EHR, and doing administrative work. And the research shows that they're spending up to, in the ambulatory setting, up to half of the clinic time, if not more, on these administrative tasks, and only 30% of their time with directly with patients. And you're right. The reason why physicians and healthcare professionals overall decide to get into the healthcare industry is, one, it's very intellectually challenging, of course, and that's really fun. But then two, it's the ability to connect with their fellow human, and anything that takes away from the ability to collect with their fellow human in serving patients is going to take away from that satisfaction from being a healthcare provider. And so our way of fixing this problem is with the technology that we've developed called Olivia. And that's an intelligent kind of virtual triage and documentation automation tool that kind of automates a lot of the clinical note production process for physicians and healthcare providers. And the goal and premise of this technology is very simple. What if, with the help of our technology, we can help get the patient to help draft a lot of the clinical note for the physician or the provider in advance of their appointment? And that's exactly the concept that we went ahead with developing our technology.
Wow, that could be a game changer, because I have to replicate this work that is brought to me. I have at least, if I have 15, 20 patients, I have at least 100 pages that I have to go through and put that data back into the computer without making any productive use of my time. Now, what you are saying is that this would be part of my notes through Olivia?
That's correct. And so the patient, by interacting with, say, almost something comparable like a digital clipboard in the form of their phone or a tablet provided to the clinic, the patients are able to input all their clinically relevant information from their medical history, but even further down to their chief complaints, and then the particular reason why they're here in the first place, what we call the HPI in medicine. And that's
Yeah.
the thing. If I could share one thing is, my one of my attendings in internal medicine when I was a medical student, third year, he told me that the best treatment plan and diagnosis comes from a great history, and a great history comes from who? Not from the physician.
No,
It comes from the patient.
from the patient.
And therefore, with that idea in mind, is, well, the patient is the one that has a history. So what if we can help guide them with extracting that clinical detail of the history of present illness, to take that information, give it to you, the physician, in advance in your EHR as a draft HPI, draft review systems, and a draft past family social medical history for you to review and build on, instead of having something blank that you have to extract or take from the paper and put it again into the computer.
Alex, why nobody has ever thought of that so far? I mean, it's really what you're telling me is a very common sense, and we all have been struggling with this solution because it's almost 10 years we've been implementing EMR. There, there's no one has ever mentioned that.
I think it goes back to that issue where I was saying about the people focus more on the solution than the problem itself.
Yeah.
and slash or they obsess with the technology and do not focus as much on the problem that they're solving with the technology. And that goes to, you know, a lot of these, again, these kind of AI documentation companies that use, say, like, you know, the smartwatches or the kind of like the Alexa smart speaker in the room. um, they don't They're usually led by engineers instead of physicians, so they don't have the full scope of the understanding of the clinical workflow. And that's the big key with our company, because we employ physicians who are the developers. They are the technological developers. And so
That's
they're
correct.
developing through the lens of the provider first and foremost. And then once, because they understand the clinical workflow, then they identify the ways of how to apply technology to fix those problems. But that comes second to the problem and understanding the problem.
So, as I understand that this team is primarily, the company is run by, um, of course, you being the CEO, the leader of the team, and then other physicians part of it as part of this company that making solutions for doctors because they face these problems on a daily basis. It could be a life changer. I can see that relief on, from my end. Okay, I have reviewed the information. I can now go and talk to them. Miss Smith, I understand where you're coming from, and now let me help you where you are. So this is solves a big problem of our clinical interactions. My question for you is, you said it's an artificial intelligence technology. So sometimes it happens to me. My patients, we give them this paper, and they say nothing changed. I'm just here for follow up. Now, how would your patient, if we give them this form and they don't want to do it, would this pull up their old office visit and say nothing has changed? This was my last interaction with this doctor.
Yes, actually, it does. And one of the key aspects for the AI that we've integrated within the technology is, one, that it's built with prediction algorithms that we've trained using research data from, you know, research studies. So it helps kind of to identify with that approach what it means in common, you know, in kind of this basic language is, it helps our technology essentially identify what's the most important clinical content or questions to ask the patient. Now, what you were just mentioning is, you're right. A lot of these technologies aren't capable of looking back at the previous visit. And as you know, as a clinician, it's a continuum, right?
Yep.
It's a care
Yep.
continuum, the
It's a continuum.
continuity of the
Yep.
care, right? So you have to be able to look at the primary reason as to what they came back. And for example, in a patient in your clinic that has, say, you know, polyarticular joint pain, you know, multiple areas of joint pain, which have different ratings and different descriptions. Our technology, based on that initial, you know, kind of go through of the workup of the joint pains, will be able to look back and say, hey, you know, Mrs. Smith, it looks like, you know, last time you said that your wrist pain was about a 5 out of 10. Is it any better? Is it worse? Is it still a 5 or a 10? Or if it's better, you know, where is it now? The stiffness, about, you know, is it 80% better? Is it 50% better? It's going to go back and look and piece together the relevant questions that you want to see as a physician to determine if the patient is responding to your treatment plan, or if you need to make modifications if they're not responding to it.
Okay. Well, I would like to know, how are you, um, as you know, by implementation of Obamacare, all the physicians had to have an electronic medical record, right? At that time, you were developing your company. How are you now bringing your technology into an existing technology? Because most of them, I feel like they're not very friendly with each other.
Yeah, you're correct. You know, the EHRs, they do, you know, there are some, you know, they do have the capability of what we call interoperability. But
Mhm.
of course, you know, there's still a lot of kind of logistics and red tape behind a lot of these implementations. We do have the ability to integrate directly into an EHR, but we've also learned very recently to not also just put ourselves at the mercy of the EHR,
Okay.
and built a way to work around the EHR if we need to. And that is by providing, essentially, because we know all EHRs have to be able to export a patient spreadsheet with all the identifiers. We can take that, and per law, that's required, you know, in order to be eligible for the meaningful use. We just can take that spreadsheet, upload it into our platform, and bam, you've already connected the patients with our technology, um, and can send that over to the EHR. So,
So when that part is done, so I'm going to give you an example of what I'm trying to understand as,
hmm
let's say I use Grammarly to
hmm
write a note on a patient, and
hmm
because sometimes voice recognition has
hmm
errors, right?
sure.
Once Grammarly fixes that for me, I can paste it into my electronic record. Is that something like that your Olivia can do that? Like the document is then copy pasted into.
That's exactly how it's done.
Okay.
Because we were able to connect with that spreadsheet with our
Yep.
platform, it links up the patients, and you can see in real time when and if and when they've completed the spreadsheet. And usually, by the way, the physicians actually don't interact with this. Usually, with the help of the medical assistants, they will help. They will see, okay, patient is already done. They'll look at the draft note, take it, copy it, paste it. Which, by the way, it's in the format of your EHR. Paste it into the
Wow.
proper spot of the EHR. Save it as a draft. So by the time you actually begin chart reviewing for the first time for your patient, you already have that draft note, and you can of course still make edits to it, change things, go in with the patient, talk to them, delete things if you want.
Wow. So it could be a waha moment for all of us.
Yeah, and you
Let
don't
me,
need the EHR integration for it. It can
yeah.
get up and
Uh,
running in less than 5 days.
I would like to know, I, I, as a physician, I've worked with Allscripts, Cerner,
Mhm.
Epic. Are you working with these big companies in the United States?
Yes, so we have partnerships with kind of what we call APIs that
Okay.
we connect to.
Yep.
And what they're able to do is, as long as we connect to that API partner that we're using, they can connect to whatever the specific, what we call endpoint is for each of the EHRs, because they communicate in a different language, let's say, right?
Yep. Yep.
So, and our partners do have implementations with Epic, Meditech, Cerner, Allscripts, Athena, the main big ones. Um,
Interesting.
and so, yes, we are very much capable, and we have some of those implementations already in place.
Question: languages.
Mhm,
Most 100% electronic medical records um, are in English, of course.
mhm.
Um, is there a capability, or have you thought of a patient limited in English could and then could be translated, something of that nature? I know there could be
Mhm.
hiccups, but is there something thought about it?
Yes, that's actually one of the tasks that our product team is doing right now, is to make sure that we can, as part of our mission to increase the access of technology and care to, all communities, and that includes all languages that are spoken. And so we have some early implementations for Spanish,
Yeah.
but we can also essentially do any other language that's patient facing, anything from Urdu. We can do Vietnamese, Cantonese,
Asian
Mandarin.
Cantonese,
Hmm
because there's big pockets of these populations within the United States. I remember working at NYU Downtown Hospital in Manhattan, about a block from Chinatown, and my patients, we could not talk to them until we gave the Chinese version of it. So I think that Cantonese is a big language to be, focusing on. But I'm glad you're looking in that. Um, I can see this company growing, and because there is value for doctors in it. Where do you see yourself from 5, 10 years from now? Um,
Sure. I definitely still see myself with Valhalla Healthcare. Hopefully, we've grown and been able to grow our team and grow our product offerings. But I think the main thing of seeing myself with the company is, our vision is, we want to take the vision as far as we can, and that includes all the way to potentially devising new ways to deliver care.
yeah.
Getting our physician engineers to kind of rethink the way we deliver care, so therefore we can meet our mission of affordable, accessible, and effective healthcare. Because as we can tell, there are a lot of shortcomings with the current models that we've got. So, and that will of course leverage many things like Olivia, which we do anticipate, with the more data and getting it more accurate, those prediction models more accurate, kind of assist with care coordination, with clinical decision support, potentially to help empower the physicians to kind of identify who are the patients that really need to be seen first at the most, like your chronic care patients, and those that may not necessarily need to go into the office and be seen, like say our younger patients who pre-COVID-19 had an ILI. So that's what we're trying to potentially, that's just an early taste, but that's what we are looking in the future to get to. And I would say in about 5 years, we will start breaking ground on that.
And I think that what I am getting excited about the thought process is that actually AI could make us make decisions, smarter decisions, most cost-effective decisions, and make us kind of smart doctors, right? Because we are using technology, the information that we can't have it in our mind all the time because we are humans, right? But this technology can help us make better decisions through the use of AI and the information. And because you are a physician behind it, you understand the part of how a mind of a physician thinks to make decisions. Any roadblocks, Alex, that you're facing that you get frustrated about?
Oh, I mean, that's the story of startups and
Yeah.
early stage companies are roadblocks after roadblocks. But like I mentioned at the top, is my key skill is in problem solving, and so I know we will always face tons of roadblocks and will continue to do so. But I think with our team is that we're able to kind of break through them because of us trying to we can figure out how to do that and understand the problems. But absolutely, some exact examples that we faced in the past is one. I mean, that EHR question. We were at the mercy of the EHR about a year and a half ago, and couldn't get any sales or implementations because every time physicians said that, can you integrate with the EHR, we're like, well, no, or we could, but then even if we could, then there's this 30, 90-day process of getting the EHR up and running, the connection, and maybe associated fees that were too expensive for either the client or for us. So we really hit a brick wall in that case. And our solution to that, after a lot of thought and even consultation with some of my other physician friends, is, well, hey, what if we came up with that quote unquote hack around the EHR? And that's through that spreadsheet workaround. With take the spreadsheet from the EHR, connect it to our platform. You just connected the patient, their email, their phone, their date of birth, their MRNs, all of that. And then that links it up with our platform. They finish up the encounter. MA gets the note, drops into the EHR, done.
Great. Now, as a thoughtful person that you are also aware of cybersecurity and patient confidentiality. How do you address that challenge?
Yeah, so we make sure, for us, it's more than just being what we call HIPAA compliant, quote
Hmm.
unquote, but being HIPAA proactive. And so we do regularly consult with, cybersecurity specialists to make sure that we can try to be a step ahead and not just meet the minimum requirements, but rather see if we can be proactive in defending, any of these cyber intrusions that we see in the news. We definitely don't want patients, and again, me as a physician and our other physicians, it's not just something that we have to adhere to, but rather it's a duty of ours to make sure that we protect patient information.
Wonderful. So you are actively making your software more protected. And um, now let me ask you, at such a young age, you have developed a sense of resilience and strength. How did you get to this point? Is there a event in life? What made you who you are?
Oh, I think it's a multiple, I think, events and experiences in my life. In itself, it's a pretty long story, but I think the main ones would be, just as a kid, I know my parents will tell you I've always been a very imaginative child, having a vision. I used to always play with Legos and build these really big, things, and always play with like clay and things. So it was just that the ability to be free and to build and kind of train my the way I think into that. Also, having my first job with the family business when I was 12 years old at the family ice cream shop, that really gave me a lot of understanding of customer service, customer support, which patient care. There's a lot of that customer service in there that I
Of
think a lot
course.
of physicians, might even lack. I would say, and that taught me also the value of time and money. Um, and so there were many aspects of my life that kind of built me to that. And of course, issues and troubles that I've ran into, in my own, romantic life, to my own personal issues that I've had, with myself, dilemmas that I've faced, even struggling to determine when I was in college, do I really want to be a physician or do I want to be a business person? That was a key dilemma that I faced in college. With, long story short, being the two don't necessarily have to be mutually exclusive if I don't want it to be.
Yeah. Let me ask you another question. When you look at a life of a of a young CEO, an entrepreneur. You could be working 24/7 and the hours might seem less. How are you balancing this? I mean, are you just working all the time? How you?
You know, you actually described it. I kind of am working all the time. I do. My colleagues and our team knows that I work 7 days a week, 365 days a year, during Christmas, during birthdays, during funerals. It doesn't that doesn't change. And the main reason is that, one, I love what I do. I believe in the mission, and therefore it has that paradoxical effect that the more energy you put in, the more energy you get out.
Yeah,
Which is, I know, paradoxical, and at its face value. um, and two, honestly, it is a way of, the way that I manage my time is that while I say I work every day, I also say that I take a vacation every day too, because I know when I'm most efficient. Thankfully, from medical school and in college, learning how to most efficiently spend your time and study and manage. I know during the morning parts and the early afternoon, or the morning is when I'm most efficient for solitary thinking and time. The early afternoons, I do a lot of most of my calls, because that's where that solitary, focus kind of diminishes, but I can still do calls. By the time, in kind of like around 4 p.m., around that time, I go ahead and call it in, whenever I feel that
wow.
I'm not as efficient. And I spend time with family. I play video games. I go exercise. I have a greenhouse that I manage in our backyard. I do things. And so I always
Don't
say
tell
I
me
take a
too much
vacation.
about those parts. I'm gonna get into that. Good.
Okay,
I'm excited that you have
sure.
some more things to share with me. Um, Let me ask you about some. So every one of us have a soft heart, a soft part of our heart for a community. Growing up, have you seen some people that you really wanted to help, and one day when your company is really big and strong and you're in the position to help, who you want to help?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think there's maybe two main communities. One is the academic community. So,
Hmm.
as you know, as us, we've been students for a very long time, and we always still are students. By the way, I don't believe we're never not students. But giving back, and I've actually already started on that. I do presentations for free at universities, graduate schools, and so I do give lectures as a guest lecturer sometimes, and that's part of my mission of giving back of what was given to me, a lot of education and knowledge. And so I think that's one general community. So I'd love to continue seeing if there's an aspect of me teaching, maybe as a visitor role at a medical school. I'd love to do that, in technology and other aspects outside of that related to medicine. um, and then also, of course, the underserved communities, impoverished communities. A lot of the time that I spent when rotating in our community hospitals here and community clinics in the Houston area during my time in medical school, I'm fluent in Spanish because my mother is Mexican. And a lot of the individuals that seek care in our community clinics are undocumented, underserved, Spanish only speaking communities. And it really is a whole different type of care when you're able to really communicate with them in the same language instead of using a translator. So I really developed, some extra, more compassion and empathy for those underserved communities. And then also my dad's side, when I visited Bangladesh, my dad's from Bangladesh, and as you know, it's one of the more poorest
Of course,
countries in the
yeah.
world. And really kind of being there on the streets with, with many of the citizens, and understanding that, look, there's a lot that I have at home that many of these folks do not have, and I would like to be able to kind of give back in some way. And hopefully that's something that's aligned with the mission of our technology, and providing healthcare to everyone.
Impressive. And I love the how you are combining the two, um, your family, your culture of from Spanish culture as well as Bangladeshi culture, and you're bringing together. I can see the passion that you have in your words and in your eyes. um, I want to ask you, a has there been a life advice given to you that you would like to share with us that has actually helped you? And if somebody is listening to you today, maybe it could help them.
Sure. I think, let me see. One of the quotes that I kind of pretty much live by is that there's a solution to everything, as long as you're willing to try hard enough to find it.
Yeah.
I think not. I do operate with the philosophy of nothing is impossible unless asterisk you can mathematically prove it. Um, but that's the main thing. I think it's the perseverance um, is really important. I also think that taking uh, being able to take advice, being able to make sure and understand that you're not the smartest person in the room, respecting and really understanding advisors and letting them guide you, letting their wisdom and experience guide you. So, all of us CEOs and founders obviously have some degree of ego, but I think that's important that it's checked, and that is by keeping an advisory board, both for the professionally and then personally, having your own personal advisory board to kind of keep you grounded and focused, so you don't get carried away by the the seductions in, whether it be finances or power or and instead being able to really help you channel those new gained mechanisms to help do good and execute your mission.
Wow, that's a new kind of leadership that we'll be seeing in world of IT and healthcare, because ego has always been an issue with CEOs, and I'm thankful for your open-mindedness and sharing that thought. Okay, well, that would conclude our professional part, and we will head on for a little break, and then we'll start our fun part.
That sounds good to me. Thank you very
Okay,
much, Dr.
thank
T
you.
here.